Substitute Episode 3. Austin's mother told him stories about his true identity after his father died. In fact, the first time she ever mentioned anything was on the night of his father's funeral. That evening, they sat in the middle of their one-room apartment, which did not even have enough space to swing a cat. Austin was drowsy because she interrupted his sleep, so it took a while to gather his thoughts. But Ojevwe was saying something like she was not his real mother, and that she felt the need to speak the truth due to his father's sudden death. She narrated how they bought him from a middle-aged midwife minutes after his birth. She even mentioned the midwife's name and her location, explaining that the desperation of being childless for 12 years pushed them to do it. As she spoke, Austin rubbed his sleepy eyes. "Mama, why are you telling me all this?" He honestly could not comprehend a word of what she said. Perhaps she was overwhelmed by the death of her husband and had started hallucinating. The calm breeze wafting through the cracked glass windows far outweighed the artificial breeze from the dangling fan, yet Austin's skin was on fire. He had suffered a long day from the rigors of organizing his father's funeral. Putting up with unwarranted demands from extended family, coupled with mandatory traditional rites, left him drained, so he yearned for some respite. He fell asleep when the last set of mourners departed, but it appeared his mother spent the rest of the evening in tears. Ojevwe reached out to touch his shoulder. "I remember the first day I looked into your eyes. I was happy, so grateful to God because you brought us joy." The intensity of her loss painted heavy coats of pain on her mournful face, and her frequent sighs were an attempt to ease the heaviness in her chest. "Even though I am not your real mother, I still feel like I gave you life." "Mama, what are you talking about?" Austin asked. Ojevwe sensed her confession ripped her son's heart apart, yet she pressed on. "I didn't bring you into this world, Austin. Another woman did, and I want you to look for her. If you locate Mama Tosan in Ogara, I am sure it will be easy to..." Before she could complete her sentence, Austin sprang up. "Mama, please stop this nonsense. The only mother I know is you." How could it be that the woman who nursed and supported him with every drop of sweat would not be his mother? Her tale that evening was ludicrous, and he hoped in his heart that she would stop. Instead, she broke into tears again. Her fragile shoulders shook as she sobbed. "My mind has not been at rest since we took you away from your real mother and your brother." "Brother?" Austin felt a sudden tightness in his chest. "Do I have a brother?" "I was there on the night you were born. We were there, your father and I. We waited patiently for you to be handed over to us. And I remember Madame Tosan assured us that there would be no problems because your mother had given birth to a set of twins," Ojevwe said. "She could lie that one of you died while she secretly handed you over to us. Please forgive me, forgive us," she cried. Austin stared at Ojevwe for several seconds. He did not know what to think, or how to process the information he had just received. All he knew was that his head was heavy and the room was closing in on him. But when he found his tongue, he said, "You are the only mother I know." With that, he walked out of the room to catch some fresh air. He refused to discuss or brood over the matter again after that day. Austin hawked bedsheets on the highway from the early age of 9. His father, Lazarus Osagi, worked as a security officer in a textile mill and was often owed his salary, so he rarely brought anything to the table. As soon as Austin was admitted into secondary school, he helped his mother after school in her shop, where she sold fabrics and made clothes for her low-end customers. But when he turned 19, he dropped out of school because his parents could not afford to pay for his final examination. It was only after he got a job at a construction site that Austin could save enough money to pay his final exam fees. He continued to work his way through a 2-year diploma program in mechanical engineering. It was during this time that he met and became friends with Chinedu Ezendu. Chinedu was also from a humble background. His father was a civil servant, while his mother was an elementary school teacher. Logically, but he afforded certain luxuries because, unlike Austin, he worked for a logistics firm that paid good money. They both aspired to secure a direct entry admission into the university, but Austin almost backed out because he could no longer support himself through school. It was at that point that Chinedu engaged him in a few supplies of illegal drugs within the country, and the proceeds helped to pay his school fees and cater for his personal needs. After Ojevwe died, Austin went through several emotions in the days, months, and years that followed. Was his biological mother still alive? What about his twin brother? They probably thought he was dead, so he needed to let them know he was still alive. With no other family on the face of the earth, Austin finally gave in to Ojevwe's dying wish. A trip to Ogara in Delta State was his first major step in tracing his family. He located Madame Tosan's house only to discover she had passed on the previous year. Perhaps if he had been there earlier, he might have been able to meet the woman who orchestrated his separation from his twin and mother. From what Austin gathered, she ran the place as an unlicensed delivery center, and most of the patronage she received was from surrounding communities. Her baby trade business was classified information, but he was lucky to find a lady who gave him a clue to his mother's whereabouts. He traced Imue to a steel factory, where she worked as a secretary, only to discover she moved to Port Harcourt with her son after the death of her husband. A former colleague was nice enough to assist with a phone number, but it was no longer valid. 2 months after, he tried the number again, and this time it rang. Imue's voice was as cold as the steel when he divulged his identity. She told him that her son was dead, and was about to hang up the call when Austin mentioned Mama Tosan's name. He narrated how his parents bought him from Mama Tosan while convincing Imue he died a few hours after birth. Imue said nothing more to him during the call, so when he got off the phone he was more confused than relieved. It surprised him when Imue called the following day and gave the phone to Paul, who Austin assumed was his long-lost twin brother. It was at that point that Austin offered to pay them a visit. "Excuse me, sir." Austin's eyes parted, and an attractive-haired hostess with a dulcet voice smiled down at him. "Please adjust your seat to an upright position. The aircraft is about to land." She leaned forward to fold his tray table to its full vertical position. "Seatbelts fastened, please." "Thank you," Austin said. The airport buzzed with its typical beehive of activities, and the 40-minute wait felt like forever. Passengers hurried to catch their flights. Others passed time lounging in chairs, while some stood in 2s and 3s, waiting for their flights to be announced. Paul felt the thrill of vacation makers waiting to be flown to their destination, but he could not share their excitement because his hands were flighty, and there was an empty feeling in the pit of his stomach. A young mother chased her toddler son in circles around the crowded hall, while a love-struck couple engrossed in some heartfelt conversation walked by. His phone beeped. Lara sent some encouraging words. She had offered to accompany them to the airport, but he didn't want to bother her. Paul noticed his mother kept eyeing the arrival exit. She was incredibly quiet, and he didn't know what to say to her. Life had always been about the two of them. Everyone who knew them envied their close mother-son relationship, but that was about to change forever. He reached for Imue's hand and squeezed it. "I am a bad mother," Imue said. "It's not your fault. You thought he was dead, remember?" Paul replied, "It doesn't matter. I should have done something." Imue's nerves were getting the best of her. "Let's just hope this whole thing is real," Paul said, and at that instant, the announcement came up for a flight from Lagos. "How will we know what he looks like?" Paul was licking his lips. "He is supposed to look like you," Imue replied. She was so sure that Paul almost asked her how she knew it, but the truth was, if they were actual twins, then a resemblance was inevitable. Imue spotted Austin first as he emerged from the arrival lounge. "That must be him," she pointed, and they made their way towards Austin, who had also spotted them. Austin wore a blue polo t-shirt over a pair of matching blue jeans and carried a lightweight bag as his only piece of luggage. As soon they stood facing each other, Imue threw her arms around him and embraced him, struggling to hold back her tears as she ran her hands up and down Austin's face. "My son!" Imwe cried. When Paul set eyes on Austin, he knew his mother was right. Even though he stepped back to give both Austin and his mother a moment to bond, he saw that Austin had the same slender build, same height, and same pair of brown eyes that stood out like two splotches of mud. They even wore the same buzz-cut hairstyle, and Paul knew that the only thing that could tell them apart were his pair of glasses. When Imwe disengaged from her son, Austin approached him for a handshake and a quick embrace. Sitting down on his Imwe's couch later that evening, they talked for several hours. It was an opportunity to catch a glimpse into Austin's life. Unlike Paul, his upbringing did not sound interesting because he grew up in the slum and worked several jobs to put himself through school. He was in his third year in the university after securing a national diploma, while Paul finished up his schooling abroad and had a thriving career. From all indications, Paul seemed like a better version of Austin, polished and gainfully employed, while his brother looked smashed from all the struggles and challenges he had been through in life. When Lara called at past 11 p.m., Paul excused himself from the room where his mother and brother sat. "Hi." His voice sounded husky from an evening of overwhelming emotions. "How is it going?" "It's true," Paul said. "Oh my God, is he there with you?" "Yes, but I stepped out to take this call." "Does he look like you?" Lara asked as Paul looked over his shoulder. He could hear his mother and brother's faint voices as they continued to catch up on lost years. "It feels like looking at myself in the mirror," he replied. "Wow, how is your mum?" "We've all been chatting and trying to join the dotted lines." "What about you? How are you holding up?" "I'm still blown away, but I'll be fine. Don't forget to let him know he's having dinner with us tomorrow." "Thank you, baby." He meant every word. "I love you. Love you too." When the call ended, Lara held the phone close to her chest for some minutes, relieved that the tension was fizzling out. Paul sounded more relaxed, and she could tell his mother did not feel so much guilt anymore. Lara looked forward to meeting Paul's twin and hoped that this reunion would be a blessing in disguise. Austin showed up at the right time, and perhaps he could be Paul's best man at their wedding. Her lips parted in a smile at the thought. Their muscles eased with controlled breathing as they recovered from intimate waves of bliss. Thereafter, they were wrapped in each other's arms, satisfied with the silence and warmth of their naked bodies. Lara spoke first. "I came across a verse in the Bible and I think it'll make an amazing vow." "Vow," Paul repeated. "Yes, matrimonial vow." Lara tried to help him focus. "Who is getting married?" As ridiculous as Paul's question sounded, Lara pretended it did not bother her. Instead, she sat up on the bed. "It's a friend, but I love it," she said. "Would you like to hear it?" "Sure," Paul replied as Lara reached for a sheet of paper in her bag. "Love is patient, love is kind." She finished up the Bible verse with a smile. "What do you think?" she asked, but what she meant to say was that she could not wait to have him read those vows to her someday. "Okay." Paul shrugged. "Just okay?" She threw him a quizzical stare. "It's a bit lengthy though," he said. "Seriously." Lara's shoulders dropped at Paul's lack of enthusiasm. She then posed a more direct question. "What's your idea of a wedding vow?" she asked, and Paul yawned. He was still groggy, so he couldn't believe Lara would choose this time to probe him on marital vows. The truth was that Edem's passing had taken a big toll, and he was scared of commitment. "Well," his voice trailed off, "I have never thought about it, but my idea would be to keep it short. Nothing beyond 2 lines. "Really?" Lara obviously didn't agree. "I think the secret lies in the meaning of the words. If your heart is in the words, you could memorize a page without knowing." Lara held up the sheet of paper in her hand. "These words are pure and incredible. They reflect what true love should be at all times," she said. "Baby, can we discuss this later?" Paul's body begged for more sleep before heading over to pick Austin up for dinner. "Okay," Lara said. If he didn't want to talk about it, then she had to let him be. She slipped into her housecoat and started to leave the room, but halted at door. "Do you ever see me in your future?" she asked. "Huh?" "Your future. Me. You. Us." "If I didn't, we wouldn't be here," Paul said. "So why are we stuck at this point? Why are we not moving to the next level?" Lara hated to sound insensitive to Paul's recent challenges, but she yearned for him to give her hope about their future together. Sadly, those words never came out, and she now feared that he did not feel the same way about her. "Baby, I'm going through a lot. I just met my twin brother for the first time in my life. It's been tough for me, and I wish we would not quarrel over this." "Do I sound like I am quarreling?" Lara rolled her eye. "The future is now. Let's enjoy the moment and the fact that we have each other. Tomorrow will worry about itself," he said. Dee and Lara turned to leave the room. She entered the kitchen, dislodged a pack of frozen chicken from the freezer, and slammed it on the slab. It was cold and unresponsive, just like Paul. She already promised to make dinner for his twin brother, and even though she no longer felt up to it, she had to play the perfect girlfriend. She set the table 15 minutes before Paul and his brother arrived, and as soon as she heard the doorbell ring, her heart began to race. Austin stood beside his brother, looking every bit like him. Tall, trim and handsome, with the same narrow face and eyes. There was hardly any physical difference except for the glasses which Paul wore often. "My God," she gasped. The mystery of twins was ever so fascinating, and she secretly wished that when Paul married her, they would have a set of twins too. "You look so much like your brother," she said. "Except for the glasses," Austin smiled. "Except for the glasses," she repeated, and they laughed. Paul cleared his throat and circled his arm around Lara. "Austin, this is Lara, the love of my life," he said. Lara seemed warm and classy as Austin's eyes lingered on her. Her flawless light complexion and brown hazelnut eyes drew attention to her heart-shaped face. That evening, she wore an apron over a short dress and held her hair up in a knot. "It's nice to have you," Lara said as she led the way to the dining area. "Lara is an excellent cook, lawyer and fashion designer," Paul announced to Austin, who had not taken his eyes off her. Even when they feasted, he occasionally stole glances at her. "I just got back from our training school in Jos, and the pathetic plight of the agency has reached a stage where we need to establish a national emergency master plan." Paul started a new line of discussion as he dug into his meal. Austin already picked up on Paul's job. The fact that his brother was a staff of the agency unnerved him because the agency was an obstacle to the business he was engaged in, although this trip was supposed to help him turn a new leaf. "The facilities are in a deplorable state, so how can staff carry out their core functions when they are not equipped?" Paul asked rhetorically, as Austin and Lara nodded. "To make matters worse, there's no adequate insurance cover for those who take part in dangerous operations such as raids. I can testify to that because I lost my best friend 2 years ago, and there's nothing solid in place for his family. Absolutely nothing yet. We have people in high places who should look into these issues." Lara's gaze fell because she knew Paul referred to her father, but what she did not understand was why he brought it up in front of Austin. "The Senate should make supplementary budgetary allocations to those agencies that perform unique duties," she said. "And why was such an important aspect omitted from the budget in the first place?" Paul fired back. Austin cringed at the way Paul attacked his girlfriend. Paul's discontent was valid, but what did Lara have to do with it? "This problem is as much an indictment on the executive as it is on the legislative. Lara, the clock is ticking. Zrania and your father needs to do something." Paul turned to Austin and added, "Lara's father is the chairman of the agency." Afterward, he sipped his drink while a stretch of awkward silence ensued. At that point, Austin tactically changed the topic because he saw Lara shift in her chair more than once. and he was not comfortable with the topic either. "Lara, how has it been coming back into the country and having to start a new business?" he asked. "Great," she forced a smile. It appeared she was careful not to say anything that would make Paul pass another comment about how she had it easy because her father was a top government official. "I once worked for a fabric distributor many years back," Austin said. "You did?" Lara's eyes lit up. "Yes, my mother. I mean my adopted mother." Austin looked at Paul. "I understand," Lara said. "We dealt with all kinds of fabrics, mainly imports from China and Turkey, but not directly though. She bought from the people who bought from the people who bought from the people that imported from China and Turkey." Lara's laughter was genuine and refreshing, and he could tell her nerves were finally at ease. "Sourcing fabrics can be a major challenge in our business," Lara said. "Are you telling me?" Austin's eyes widened as they continued to chat. "There are no proper channels for advertising these fabrics, so one needs to always see them before making a purchase. For instance, I have to travel to Lagos and Aba from time to time to get supplies. Isn't that stressful? Yes, another issue is staffing. My business is barely 2 years, and I have changed staff like I change shoes. It's so difficult to retain staff as a small business owner." Lara lamented. "It's like that everywhere," Paul added, as he poured out wine for the three of them. Austin could relate with Lara's plight. Those days he had to cover for his mother's staffing issues by taking on extra workload in her shop, and mainly because he was the only one she could trust. "Thank God I can sew, otherwise I would have gone out of business by now," Lara chipped in as Austin laughed. Lunch finally seemed to go well. "Maybe you can come by the studio one of these days. It'll be nice to show you around." She looked over at Paul, who nodded in agreement. "Sure, why not?" Austin sipped his wine. The food was fantastic, but he had to stop because he started to feel stuffed. "Thanks for dinner, Lara. Banga and starch is my all-time favorite," he said. Lara raised her forehead and turned to Paul, who was smiling too. That's also Paul's favorite meal. Lara had never been this close to twins before, and it felt magical. "So you guys have a lot of things in common without even knowing?" "I guess so," Austin responded. Their similarity in the choice of women was definitely possible, as Lara looked like the kind of woman he could see himself with. When Lara started to clear the table, Paul offered to help, while Austin reclined to the living area with his drink. Back in the kitchen, Paul wanted to clear things out with his girlfriend. "Hey, sorry if I upset you back there," he said, as Lara placed the pile of dishes in the kitchen sink so she could face him. "Why do you always have to do that? You talk about my dad with no respect and act like the country is the way it is because of him. It's nothing personal. It's the job, and I... How could I ever forget? It always has to be about your job. You weren't in JOS with me, so it might be difficult to explain things to you." Paul's neck stiffened. He could feel blood rushing to his face again, and he needed Lara to get on the same page with him, but Lara was done. She turned to leave the kitchen, but he held her hand. "You know what, Paul? You don't appreciate me, otherwise you wouldn't raise such a topic in front of your brother, who, by the way, is dining with us for the first time." "Okay, I agree, I may have slipped, but are we going to quarrel over this?" Paul's tone was soothing, as he raised his hands in surrender and added, "Dinner was wonderful and I appreciate you, but are you going to be mad at me because of what I said, or is it because I refused to read your paper vows this morning?" Lara glared at him. At that point, Austin poked his head to inform them that someone was at the door. "That should be the plumber. I called him to fix a broken pipe in the bathroom." Paul hurried off, leaving the two of them in an uncomfortable silence. Austin could tell Paul had been apologizing for tripping during dinner, but he wondered why anyone would make such a blunder in the first place. Lara also seemed forgiving, and it made him wonder how often Paul tripped.
Thanks for watching. This story was written by Uduak, Edet, and produced by Tconcepts.